Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Robin Wansley, and I am the chair of the Administration and Enterprise Oversight Committee. I am going to call to order our regular scheduled meeting for today, March 3rd, 2025. But before we begin the meeting, I do want to offer a friendly reminder to all committee members, staff, and the public that these meetings are broadcast live to enable greater public participation. These broadcasts include real-time captioning as a further method to increase the accessibility of our proceedings to the community. Therefore, all speakers need to be mindful of the rate of their speech so that our captioners can fully capture and transcribe all comments for the broadcast. We ask that all speakers moderate the speed and clarity of their comments. With that in mind. So I will ask the clerk to call the roll to verify we have a quorum.
Councilmember Vita.
Present.
Ellison is absent. Cashman.
Present.
Chugtai is absent. Vice Chair Palmisano.
Present.
And Chair Wansley.
Present.
We have 4 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have quorum. I also will note for the public record that Council Vice President Chugtai did inform our office ahead of time that they would be absent at today's meeting. Also, in addition to that, I do want to remind my colleagues that we will be using speaker management today. So please be sure to sign in or let the clerks know if you need assistance, if you're having troubles with that. Before we move on to our published agenda, I am proposing an addition to the consent agenda. That RCA is before you. The proposed addition is a gift acceptance from the Coalition of Large Public Housing Authorities for lodging and conference registration. This is for me to attend the spring meeting that's going to take place between March 20th and 21st of this year, 2025. And I would like to add that to the agenda, and that could be taken up at the end of the consent agenda. So with that, I will see if there's any questions. Seeing none, on the motion to add this item to the consent agenda, also as at the end, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. All right, that motion carries and the agenda is amended. That said, there are 10 items in addition to the walk-on item on the consent agenda, which I'll now read for the public record. Number 1 is a bid for construction of valve vault around Minneapolis and Golden Valley water mains. Number 2 is a bid for construction of the first phase of the biochar production facility. Number 3 is a contract with FCC, Environmental Services Minnesota, LLC, for the operation of the city's Southside Municipal Solid Waste Transfer Station. Number 4 is contract with Meter LLC for advertising services for the health department. 5 is contract amendment with Meyer Contracting, Inc. for the Hennepin Ave Street South Reconstruction Project. 6 is a contract amendment with Auto Truck Service Co., Inc. for collision and mechanical repair. 7 is a contract amendment with Short Elliott Hendrickson, Inc. for engineering and design services for the Minneapolis Highway Safety Improvement and Safe Routes to School projects. Number 8 is a contract amendment with Native American Community Development Institute for fiscal agent services for the American Indian MOU for Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors. Number 9 is contract extensions with various vendors for customized safety training and training services. And then number 10 is a legal settlement with John Shanahan v. City of Minneapolis. And then added as the walk-on item, which is item number 11. That is the gift acceptance that I referenced at the beginning of the agenda. So with that, I will move approval of all items on the consent agenda, including the walk-on. But before that, we'll see if there's any speakers in queue. Okay. Seeing no one in queue, I'll just do a regular voice vote. So all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it, and that motion carries. Discussion item, which is now number 12, includes the Urban Scholars Program funding from partner organizations. This will encompass a presentation from staff, and I will ask Rich Perocha. I am already sorry for mispronouncing your name. Please correct me when you get up here. But Rich from the Human Resources Department to come up and share a presentation with us.
Thought I did. I brought a. Do you want me to just hold the laptop to get? Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Wansley, committee members. My name is Rich Perocha, and I am the HR Manager of Talent Acquisitions in the Human Resources Department, and I will oversee the Urban Scholars Program this year. For those who may not be familiar with the program, Urban Scholars is a 12-week internship designed for undergraduate and graduate students. The program's primary goal is to provide meaningful work experience by offering internships, professional development, and mentorship opportunities for underrepresented youth. It provides participants with the chance to build valuable skills, gain hands-on work experience, and expand their professional networks, all of which contribute to long-term career growth. Ultimately, the program strives to foster more inclusive and equitable opportunities across various fields. We have also taken this opportunity to do a comprehensive revision of the curriculum with a focus on relevant topics. This updated approach emphasizes a leadership model centered around social change, which highlights values that contribute to fostering positive societal transformation. This marks the first year Urban Scholars is managed under the HR department. The purpose of the presentation today is to seek approval for reimbursements from our partner organizations to cover the associated programming costs. During the 2024 budget cycle, we received approval to transfer $127,000 and 2 FTEs from civil rights to human resources. This transfer was strategic and it was very well considered. Director Odom, our CHRO, and Director Phillips, the Director of Civil Rights, along with support from our budget analyst and city attorney, played key roles in this cross-departmental collaboration. And it was their combined efforts and guidance that have caused us to be successful in getting this running on time thus far. With this funding, we expect to support between 8 to 10 scholars. This depends on the number of requests for graduate or undergraduate interns. The reimbursement will be used to cover various program costs listed above, and that will include orientation, recognition ceremonies, the Leadership Institute, and then the salaries themselves. Next, I'd like to provide a brief update on our progress. We opened applications on February 17th, with the application period set to close on March 17th. As of today, we've received over 120 applications, and we are currently outpacing last year's applicant pool with an average of 8 applications per day, compared to 5 applications per day during last year's cycle. We've also scheduled a robust promotional campaign for the program, including events at the UMN Career Center, the American Indian Center, the Community Connections Conference, the Minneapolis Career College Fair, and then scheduled radio interviews as well. And additionally, with the support of our partners in the communications department, we will have advertisements displayed on 22 electronic billboards throughout Minneapolis, which have placements on our interstate highway corridors. This year, we've also doubled the number of external partners compared to last year, and we're projecting to have more interns as a result. But I will caution that the final number will depend on the final commitments from our partner organizations. In regard to the next step, and really this is for the public, individuals interested in applying to be an urban scholar can visit our jobs website and apply for the internship just as they would for any other position in the city, so this is good practice. We currently have 3 job listings for candidates enrolled in undergraduate, graduate, and law degree programs, which should streamline the hiring process. As you can see from the timeline, the process is expedited due to the specific organizational requirements for some of our partners. We will aim to have all placements finalized within the next month and a half, with the internship set to begin on June 2nd. For our internal departments and partners, please note that the article has been published on City Talk, and we ask departments submit their request no later than March 7th. As I mentioned earlier, we have capacity for 8 to 10 internal scholars, and there are at least, as of right now, 11 departments, and some with multiple requests that have expressed interest. So due to these constraints, we may not be able to fulfill every request, but if any department is willing to fund a scholar independently, we will be happy to work with them to place one within the department. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Mr. Parocha. I do see one council member in queue. I see Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you very much, Chair Wansley. Thanks for the presentation. So you've received over 100 applications. Do you know about how many are going to be selected for the program?
As of right now, Chair Wansley, Councilmember Cashman, we have 45, we intend on funding a total of 45 scholars, 8 to 10 internally. That final number will depend on, again, what commitments our partners are able to provide us at the end of all of this.
Okay, thanks. And does anyone know if the legislative department has already submitted their request to house urban scholars?
Some,
Do you know?
Yes, some have, yes.
Some legislative department offices?
The clerk's office has submitted a request, and then some council member offices have as well.
Okay, thank you. So council offices should do that individually. That's what I'm getting from this.
Yes.
Would love to host an urban scholar intern in my office this year. Thank you very much.
No problem.
So thank you so much for that. That's all that we have in queue. I just want to name, I also requested this presentation because this has been one of our, I think, widely valued programs in collaboration between the executive branch and the legislative body. And as you noted, with the recent changes that we made in moving this program from civil rights to the Human Resource Department, just wanted to make sure the public was aware of any particular changes. And also, as you highlighted too, the timeline for applications, also even noticing as council member or noting as Councilmember Cashman raised, how the legislative department, and that includes council, can also participate in the request. So this is super informative. This is one of the moments where, again, we get to celebrate and uplift great work that we're doing to involve and bring young people into this process of governing, and also other, public agencies that you have shared here, but of course we wish we could host them all here at the city. But that said, I do see Vice Chair Palmisano in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your, Mr. Parocha, in your slides and in conversation, you mentioned that the funding you have will cover 8 to 10 interns, but you also said 45. So can you help us understand? I believe that departments probably have to find money for this within their budgets, or council offices perhaps. Can you tell me just kind of how you decide what departments get these assignments?
Yes, Chair Wansley, Councilmember Palmisano, throughout the application process, we're going to have a matching program where candidates will express interest in sort of the field that they want to pursue. These folks have a focus study, right? They're pursuing a degree in a graduate, undergraduate, or a law program, and so we're trying to align their interests with the kind of meaningful work experience that they want to have in public sector, and that's how we'll match them up.
I see. And can you help me understand how they get funded through different departments? I appreciate that you, in terms of human resources, have the funding for 8 to 10 of them. I know it seems like there's been a lot more in the past, but I might be putting two different programs together in my recollection of that.
Yes, so the $127,000, that will be used to fund the individual salaries of them. So each intern is going to cost between $10,000 and $12,000, depending on whether or not they're pursuing an undergraduate or graduate degree. So divide that by the 127, you get roughly between 8 and 10 folks, just depending on what they're going to do. We as HR will fund that, so that's where the 127 is going to come from. And then if departments want their own, or we can't access, further funds from that, they will fund it through their own departmental source.
And then, Mr. Proka, is this around the same number that we've had in the past, or is it an increase?
For internal funding, I believe this is the same number that was used last year.
Okay, thank you.
And just also clarification too, for the external partners, it sounds like they have the ability to also make financial commitments towards this program in order to receive placement of our urban scholar as well.
Correct, and that's the point of the reimbursements.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this presentation. I don't see anyone in queue, so with that, I will move this item for approval. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those not, the ayes have it, and that motion carries. Thank you again, HR, for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Next, which will be item or discussion item number 13, is the Zen City Community Perception Surveying updates. So we will be receiving an update on services rendered for the community perception surveying and preliminary findings from the surveying from Zen City. And this update comes in response to a legislative directive that my office and council passed last year, and getting more regular reporting updates on how this was being used as a tool, especially since we had lots of robust conversation about this particular contract in the previous iteration of AO, which was policy and government oversight. So with that, I will ask Zen City staff, Maurice Klassen, as well as Dr. Rachel Levingston, and MPD, I see Assistant Chief Gators here to present. So I'll invite you all up to the floor.
And Chair, if we could please have a few minutes, I believe your staff here is going to assist with the technology here. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wansley and Vice Chair Palmisano and committee. I am Christopher Gators with the Minneapolis Police Department, the Assistant Chief, and I'm here on behalf of our department to discuss the services that we have under contract with Zen City, and also the preliminary findings. So I'd like to also say we appreciate you giving us the opportunity here to go through these data insights and the police department's approach on using these data. At this point, with your permission, I'd like to introduce Maurice Klassen and Dr. Rachel Levingston.
Thank you, Assistant Chief. Chair Wansley, City Council members. My name is Maurice Klassen. I am a Senior Advisor at Zen City Technologies, and this is my colleague, Dr. Rachel Levingston, Head of our Survey Research. We're here to present to you a little bit about some of the early findings. I'm going to take some time for a couple minutes and introduce the company. I think I've presented in front of some of you before, but want to bring everybody up to speed. Then we'll turn it over to Dr. Levingston. He'll talk through the methodologies, the questions that are asked as part of this survey, and some of the early findings. Then we'll hand it back to Assistant Chief Gator, who can talk a little bit about how the police department's using the data. Just by way of background, Zen City Technologies was founded approximately 8 years ago as a company with a social purpose. The goal for the company was to build technology that builds trust between local governments and the communities that they serve. We now have several tools that are all focused on helping government better understand how residents feel about their services, projects, and activities across over 350 local government entities in cities, counties, and states. We're a global company with offices in New York, London, Vancouver, and Tel Aviv, and we have employees from all across the world, including countries like the United States, Canada, and in Israel, we have both Israeli employees and Palestinian employees, engineers in the West Bank who are helping us. And we're actually very proud of the fact that during the course of the Israel war in Gaza, that in fact we managed to keep all of the staff's jobs, including all the engineers who work on the West Bank. And we're very proud of the social mission that's unifying the company. As far as Minneapolis goes, we're now in the early part of our second year of a 5-year contract. We're delivering surveys, anonymous surveys, to members across the community via social media and other forms of digital technology. There's no surveillance whatsoever, and in fact, this is completely voluntary, and no individual personal data is being taken, and none is actually asked for. Similar to a number of jurisdictions across the country, we're now using this technology of surveys asking questions about procedural justice, including voice, dignity, respect, and top public safety concerns at a number of police departments across the country, especially those who have either been a part of a consent decree, exited a consent decree, or are focused on understanding how community are perceiving police department behaviors as part of what we call CompStat 2.0, really imagining a community-based CompStat that asks community members how they feel about their police department and how they're being served. Now to talk a little bit more about the methodology and a little bit more about what the survey results have shown, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Levenstein.
Welcome, Dr. Levenstein.
Good afternoon. I'm looking forward to talking through a little bit about how we do what we do and what we do. So beginning with the what of Blockwise, or the survey that we're administering. This is a standard survey that we have been administering to cities around the country. And the focus here is on trust in police and perception of safety. So we ask a question about safety. When it comes to the threat of crime, how safe do you feel in your neighborhood? And when it comes to trust is a very multifaceted aspect. So we turn to the literature on this and focus on the procedural justice framework that was developed by Tom Tyler and others at Yale about 25 years ago. And the core components of what we're asking when it comes to procedural justice is fairness. So the extent to which residents think that officers are seen as impartial in decision-making and consistent in their outcomes. Voice, the extent to which officers give community members a voice, a chance to tell their story, and the extent to which residents feel like their voice is heard, that their story is being listened to. And then there's respect, the extent to which people think that officers are treating them with dignity and respect. And to collect the data, we turn to where people are. People are online all the time, and this cuts across all demographic groups, including age. So over 80% of people say that they are online at least several times a day. Over 95% of adults use the internet, and that includes people over the age of 65. That number drops down to 90%. But it's a really great way to meet people where they are so we can find out how they're feeling. And the way that we collect this data is by kind of seeing, we send out ads using social media, mobile app ads, and survey panels. So it's not requiring everybody to be on social media. We try to kind of get people in different places. The way that we target a representative sample is by starting with Census Bureau estimates. We know about how many men and how many women, how many people from each age group and each race and ethnic group we should be reaching. And as the results come in, people are reporting their own demographic data. So they're saying, I am, a white woman between the ages of 35 and 54. We might tweak the way that we are targeting people. So if we're not getting enough of a particular demographic group, then we might tweak it a little bit. And then after the data are collected every month, we run a process called rake weighting, which is an industry standard way of adjusting for selection. And so that way, no demographic group is overrepresented or underrepresented in the data. Want to keep that on there? Thank you. We also reach residents in multiple languages, and I'm going to show the big list of languages in a couple of slides. In terms of the advertising we use, we really focus on neutral ads. We want to make sure that we're reaching everybody, regardless of their opinion about how MPD is doing. So the ad might say, come have your voice heard as a resident of Minneapolis. You can go to the next slide. And the way that what's really important to MPD is to try to identify, how different precincts are doing. So are there particular practices that are going on in one precinct that are very successful? Are there others that might need to be improved in some way? But there's a problem when we're doing this kind of anonymous survey that we don't have people's addresses, we don't know where they live, and people typically don't know what precinct they live in. So the way that we assign each response to a precinct is by asking for their zip code. It's something everybody knows, it's anonymous, and then we translate that zip code into a precinct. Sometimes the precinct cuts across zip code, and then we randomly assign that response to a precinct depending on how much space is in each in the zip code within each precinct. In terms of privacy protection, I want to echo what Mr. Clausen said. All responses are completely confidential. We don't ask any identifying information. And then in terms of preventing duplicate responses, because it is anonymous, we want to make sure that there isn't any ballot stuffing going on. So to do that, we use a service called fingerprinting, which collects metadata about the device itself. It's not IP address. It's also all of the apps on the phone, all of this information. We don't get access to any of that information. What our partner gives us is a random string of numbers and letters. And so if that random string of numbers and letters tries to take the survey twice in 1 month, we automatically kick out that response. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. Yeah. Now I'd like to talk about the data itself. So we have run 13 monthly cycles. And in that time, we've collected almost 12,000 responses from Minneapolis residents. On average, the sample we get is about 900. We're shooting for 800, but we tend to oversample a little bit so that we can get enough responses from each demographic group. These are the languages that we distributed the survey in. It was based on the kinds of languages that are spoken in Minneapolis. And you can see in the graphs to the right the distribution of responses. So the percent of our sample that comes from each demographic group before and after we wait. After we wait, the percent in that group becomes nearly identical to the census data. When we look at the scores, this is the percent satisfied with each of these different aspects. We've been tracking that over time, just so we can see, are there improvements? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? And what we're seeing is that respect and voice measures consistently drew the highest scores across all 13 months, while fairness consistently drew the lowest scores. And I want to emphasize that that's pretty consistent with how our data turns out across the country. Safety did see some change from month to month, which is also to be expected. Another question that we ask is an open-ended question. What is the number one issue or problem in your local area that you would like the police to deal with? And this has been a very useful question for all of our Blockwise clients. When we get these responses, these open-ended responses, we use AI to categorize them into topics and subtopics. And that way we can kind of digest the data and see what the biggest issues are. And so here you can see that the biggest issues across the city are theft, burglary, and break-in, which was at 30% in January of this year. And when we display the topics and subtopics on our monthly reports, you can kind of see how this breaks down into the topics and subtopics. And we also show it by area, by precinct. And so you can see that the top concern is different across precincts. There are some where theft, burglary, and break-ins are the most important. There's one where just general crime is most important, and so on. And I do want to just flag there, we show all of the responses on the platform on our dashboard. And so you can filter by concern. So if you wanted to have an initiative around theft, burglary, and break-ins, you can filter by that. You can see the responses that people have. That's it? Okay. I want to turn it over to AC Gator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, AC Gators.
Thank you. And just to give everyone an understanding of the phase one piece with our police department and the Zen City process was about establishing a strong baseline set of data collecting a full year supply of data with those key, identifying trends over time. Those trends will help us enhance transparency and build trust within our community and addressing community's most pressing concerns with crime. Over the past year, we've shared Zen City data with our inspectors. That was an overall intent to make certain that it's getting out to each precinct and the leaders of each precinct respectively. And those data were provided to them so they could have a better and a deeper understanding of concerns within their respective precincts. So this allows for effective follow-up. It leverages the data to identify high-risk areas of concern and utilizes support resources such as our community navigators who have done a phenomenal job this year, and it's great to have them back, and they're really engaging with the community on an internal and external spectrum. Currently, we're strengthening our ability to address and prevent crime more rapidly. In addition, we have implemented procedural justice training and audits to ensure that officers engage in community fairly and respectfully. We also are trying to further promote transparency and share officer conduct data to the public as well. And that should be going online soon, if not this week. With the collected data, we were able to create dashboards and custom reporting to review those data monthly and quarterly. The monthly reports highlight the most common community concerns such as theft, homelessness, drug use, and gun violence with each precinct. So when those data come in, the inspectors review those data within their precinct, and then they can allocate officers or engage community with a better understanding and a helpfulness of how they're going to address the concerns of the community. Also, it allows for a month-to-month comparison. Quarterly reports provide average scores for the same categories along with demographic breakdown. This helps with understanding with different groups and how they perceive the police department and experiences over time within their respective community. This helps us understand how different groups perceive their experiences, and also with the quarterly reports, we use benchmarking data to allow us to compare our scores against similar sized jurisdictions and also national averages. So in phase 2 of this process, we start using data at a higher level. Now that we have our first year of baseline data, what we try to do is work with integrating these data into our MSTAT meetings. So many of you may have heard of our community MSTAT. Internally, our MSTAT meetings are where our inspectors and our command staff go over crime data, crime trends, and they discuss it, and then of course they present it to our chief, and they have to come up with solutions for how to best approach and combat criminal activity or concerns with the people within the community. So during these meetings, we will compare the community's perception as well to actual crime data and identify the trends. This allows us to increase accountability, transparency, and operational crime and settlement data together. Our overall goal as doing this is to continue to reduce crime and also make certain that we correlate a positive community perception with our police department and a relationship with the community members, going back to what we said a couple years ago, is giving the community what they want from their police department and service. I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Klassen.
And that's really all that we have, Chair Wansley and City Council members, so we're open for questions.
Thank you so much. I do see a number of council members in queue, starting with Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Thank you, Mr. Klassen, Dr. Levenstein, and AC Gators. I have a few questions. First, about the 4 metrics that you're looking at. You have respect, fairness, safety, and one other. And I'm just wondering about how you determined what to measure, and if you measure the same thing in every city that you're working in, or if you considered in Minneapolis measuring, responsiveness or effectiveness as something that people could weigh in on, about how they're perceiving the police department.
I'll start with the last piece, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Levenstein for the remainder. As part of this process, we have a series of what we call benchmark questions, which are the ones that Dr. Levenstein will talk about with respect and fairness, so that we can compare across other cities, and that's based upon the procedural justice context that was espoused by President Obama's 21st Century Committee on 21st Century Policing. But we also add on add-on questions, which is up to the police department to add on to. So you can actually have those types of questions, Councilmember Cashman. So we want to be able to balance both what the interest is from the police department and the community with also having a benchmark set of questions so that you can compare and contrast across other cities. And I'll defer to Dr. Levenstein for the explanation for the other questions.
Yeah, those are great questions. The reason why we chose those particular constructs was because of the research backing. We took a lot of the questions from the literature itself so that we knew that they'd already been validated, and they were kind of related to some positive outcomes in terms of police legitimacy. In terms of, I want to second what Mr. Clausen said about being able to use add-on questions and being able to benchmark. And so, just the only other thing that I can add here, I think, is that we have a balancing act of wanting to include a lot of really actionable information. I think effectiveness is fantastic, with kind of the need to keep the survey as small as possible, as short as possible, so that we're kind of being respectful of people's time and also limiting the amount of people who start taking the survey and they're like, this is just too long, so they drop off. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so then I guess I'm wondering, AC Gators, if when we were crafting the survey, if you and the police department requested any add-ons, or how you perceived the questions that were the benchmark questions, and then what the police department and how we specified what we wanted to get out of this.
Yeah, Chair and Councilmember Cashman, our committee member. I wasn't in the initial stages of this, but I will say we're in hearing voice, and along with that, we have on our police department neutrality, respect, transparency, that is similar to the terms that were put out here by the doctor. Mm-hmm. And with us, of course, you've heard this many times over. With us, we want to make certain that people have a voice, and this tool is a way to give people a voice in community. And those who don't always go, as we all know, many of our constituents don't always get out to community meetings. This gives an opportunity. It's a tool to give a voice to them from the space that they're in, whether it be from their cell phone or computer or with the app. And then, of course, neutrality, making certain that everyone has that voice, no matter who you are and what perspective you have about our city and crime or your concerns, making sure they have that voice, and treating people with respect, and making certain that we're transparent with those data, as you see here, where community members are able to, and we can report back on those data that come in with their concerns as far as the verbiage, that whatever they put into the surveys.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the transparency with regard to the data. Is there a place that the general public can view the data that's been collected on the dashboard?
Not right now. Not at this point. We usually do encourage, as other cities that are partner with us, to put that data on. I think part of what MPD was considering was getting a year worth of benchmark data so they knew exactly how to use it and confident in it before they put it out publicly. But that's something we recommend to all of our cities. If you look at the city of San Diego right now, city of Seattle, city of Chicago, my hometown, all those cities have put their data online.
Okay. Is there a plan to put our data online in the near term after we've done 1 year now?
I defer to the police department.
The ultimate goal is to report back to community on those data, and I'm not a techie person, so I don't know exactly what the tech side of it requires, but I know that it's something that goes in increments and takes time. But I would defer it back to the experts in that field for recommendations on when that would be able to be done.
I think for me, it feels important to have it online. I mean, the viewing public can look into our legislative information management system and look to this presentation that was here today, but this isn't all of the data, and it's also just hard to access. So I think it would be worthwhile actually sharing the results of this with the broader community. And then the last question that I wanted to ask about was precinct by precinct is how you geographically define this data. Do you go at any level smaller than precinct, like zip code or neighborhood?
Currently, we don't. And the reason for that is so that we have enough sample to be reliable at these subgeographies. So we want to have data that are actionable and that are, geographically located so that MPD can use it effectively. But we want to make sure there's enough data. So if we go down to the zip code level, which we, on a technical level, could do, we might only have just a few responses from each zip code. So that could be pretty unreliable.
Okay, I understand. I just think that the 5th precinct, or some of the larger precincts, are so incredibly diverse by neighborhood. We have neighborhoods that are almost entirely homeowners, 99% white, and we have neighborhoods just within my ward that are 50% renter, 50% non-white. And so I would imagine that both those neighborhoods in the 5th precinct would have very different measures. And so I want to make sure that if the 5th police precinct is reviewing this data, that they're getting a good sample based on like neighborhood and different places that they're policing and not just the precinct as a whole. So
Absolutely. And, I think we can work, we'd be happy to work with MPD to kind of work through some of those issues and to see what kinds of geographies would be most important at those lower levels. And if we can't report it on a monthly basis to be reliable, we could certainly do it on a quarterly basis.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Next, I see Vice Chair Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this presentation. I had an opportunity to be briefed earlier by Mr. Clausen and others, and I think I understand this fairness metric. I had a lot of questions about that in the meeting. AC Gators, you said this data could help inspectors know where to put their resources and how to engage community. I think that's a really important benefit and function here, and it would be interesting to know if it matches what we are seeing from 911 and 311, livability kinds of issues or more difficult kinds of issues. I'm curious because this was about getting a baseline, and I would imagine that what we're looking to do is measure improvement over time, and so things like data transparency here, I think, would probably end up getting managed by ALIFA, a monitor or somebody to help for them to be the ones to be tracking this over time. I'm curious from the Zen City's perspective, or Dr. Levinston or otherwise, or maybe even it's an AC Gators question, but what are the interventions that we want to start testing now? Maybe what have you seen in other cities? And AC Gators, what are some of the things that we're going to test to then see if these metrics increase or stay the same?
That's a great question, Councilmember. I'll sort of talk about what we've seen nationally, and then I can turn it over to AC Gator to answer the more specific question in Minneapolis. So it really has to do with what kind of interventions you're actually idealizing, right? Are you talking about a communications intervention? Or are you talking about a community policing intervention? The ones that we've seen be most successful, or the ones where we've seen the most data move in a direction, have been the community policing intervention. An example that I would give is in Chicago, we called what is called a neighborhood policing strategy. It was based on something that was done in London, where you started to actually create more what they call beat integrity. You actually keep the officers within a specific geography to build community relationships. And then you separate the officers between rapid response officers and those who we call district coordination officers. Those people coordinate community activities. And what we did is we tested district by district to see both that beat integrity and that district coordination officer, if that had an impact. And it did. Unfortunately, it was pre-COVID, and so during COVID, we kind of lost the ghost a little bit on that. But that's one that was highly successful. One that we're currently testing in Seattle is their micro-policing strategy, which essentially each geography is taking a different approach to their community policing, whether it's prioritizing partnering with certain community groups. Others are targeting particular types of crime with a high-impact strategy. You may have something similar to what they do in Dallas, where you do all resources on one location and see if you can move the needle on crime, which then affects sentiment. But those are the exactly kinds of interventions that you want to see and test over the course of time to see if they move the needle on any of the numbers that you see in our testing. I'll defer to the Assistant Chief on what Minneapolis is thinking.
Yeah, thank you, AC Gators. I'm curious, are there planned interventions, or what are some new things that we might be looking to try?
Yeah, for the police department, we're, as the chief has always said, looking for the input from community. We, since 2020, I will say, have not been able to engage early on in the early 2020, 2021. When the Chief O'Hara came in, his big piece was making sure that we're continuing with listening sessions, even though we may hit the mark of a listening session with community, but continuing those on even beyond to make sure that we're getting, and to piggyback on what you're kind of saying, that sentiment data, that value of those data where you have people in the community actually telling you what's taking place. We do a great job in the city, whether it be in the entire enterprise, with collecting those data, regardless of what it is, if it's crime data, if it's data somewhere else. We do a fantastic job and have very brilliant people in doing that. I think that where we have an opportunity is to collect sentiment data. Knowing what the feeling of the community is. You do not get that always through collecting data from 911 calls, collecting violent crime that's taken place. How you get it is by going out to the community and asking, hey, what's taking place in your neighborhood? That means getting out of the squad cars. That means going to your community meetings. That means engaging and being present. And the chief has an expectation that once we get those sentiment data and we're able to compare that and merge that with the raw data that you see through our MSTAT meetings and through community meetings and presentations, that once we put those together, we're going to find ourselves in a better space by being able to get more information. Not everyone calls in on 911 calls. So those who aren't calling in on 911 calls may feel more comfortable by getting on an app and expressing themselves. They may feel more comfortable by engaging with the police that way instead of necessarily in person. So we're getting their feedback with that, and we can, as I said, merge that together and make certain that we're serving the community where they need to be served. Because there may be things, as we know, and you guys go to all these meetings as well, and your constituents say, you know, I saw this, that, and the other, maybe in an alley behind their home, but no one called 911. They're able to now get that sentiment value and the feelings of our actual constituents with regards to the crime, and we can allocate officers in those areas where necessarily on paper we don't see those data, but now we know that through the tool of this app.
Thank you. I think that is really helpful. It kind of puts this in a place of how we measure sentiment, and you're talking about things that are very hard to measure. So thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Palmisano. I had a few questions as well. So the first likely might be relevant for AC Gators or MPD. So I'm just interested to know, and I think I raised this when this came forward in POGO, and I can't recall what the response was, but usually we also have a practice of reaching out to local vendors for contracts like this, especially knowing, you know, Minnesota has a degree of institutions and think tanks that can do data production, I think, aligned with this. So I just wanted to get a sense of why staff or MPD opted to pursue just an open bid contract with Zen City specifically, instead of doing or utilizing our target marketplace vendor program to look at also local providers, especially, you know, we have universities here, things of that nature, who could do this data and be also locally based.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. It's a great question. I was new coming in to the front office and wasn't a part of those discussions. I believe there was an RFP that was done, and this was the group, my understanding, this was the group that prevailed through the RFP process. I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but I just wasn't in the initial phase of those discussions.
Yeah, that might, actually, that's a staff memo. Just even knowing, I can't recall at the time, if there was other applicants who apply from the cities that, again, if it was, you know, a university institution or another local research think tank, were those part of the process? Just getting a sense of gauging who applied. Yeah.
Yes, Chair, I'm unaware of that.
Okay. I'll note that for a staff follow-up. And then next question, and I shared this also with the briefing that Zen City staff did with my office in terms of this baseline piece. So I believe a lot of the some of the motivations for doing this survey was actually around, one, compliance with consent decree, and I have a question on that specifically later, but getting a sense of where are community perceptions of MPD in particular, and using a baseline of 2020, May 2020, maybe also pre-May 2020 to now also be able to assess to where you all are focusing, which has been this past year. So I wanted to get a sense, and maybe this is also an area where Zen City staff can share, if there was any data that MPD gave to Zen City to possibly look at pre-2024, or to be able to conceive a pre-2024 baseline, because I think that is actually where we want to see the perceptions. Where May 2020, we had this major atrocity happen at the hands of MPD that shifted drastically those perceptions, and we're now almost 5 years out and now starting to do that assessment. So for me, that feels like that would be a more appropriate baseline to start from. So just wanted to see if there was any data that could have been provided to help with that.
And Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over to Zen City for answer to that question.
So as you noted, the first time we collected the data was about a year ago. Ideally, we would have started, before. If there are additional data that could be used to kind of provide some context over time that we can use in conjunction with the survey data that we have now, we would be happy to analyze the data and write a report to see kind of how things might be changing. But because we don't have consistent measurement over time, unfortunately, it's not something that has been measured or that we can measure.
Is there any way to use the investigative reports that was also produced by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the DOJ? I mean, they use surveys in order to craft those findings.
Yeah.
And that did look at both a 10-year period and a 5-year period, and focused on MPD. And I think so even seeing, could those be used as a tool in expanding that baseline?
It's possible. I think a lot of it is, the more accurate response is it depends. I would love, as a survey researcher, I would love to take a look at that data, and we'd be happy to incorporate that if it's possible.
And then next question also builds upon just some of the existing questions around how data is being managed. I know my office has gotten a lot of questions in terms of, and you mentioned this right out the back, around if surveillance is being used, if AI technologies are being employed also in the carrying out of this survey. If you could provide clarity on that. Yeah.
I can take the AI piece.
Yes.
So the only place that we use AI is in the categorization of the open-ended questions. All of them are categorized and put into topics and subtopics so that we can kind of digest the data.
And what does that, how does that kind of manifest in terms of the usage of the AI to get to that categorization?
I'm going to give
Go for it.
the simple country lawyer answer. The way I think about it is we just basically get a set of data that is given to us from the survey, and then we overlay the AI onto that set of data. In other words, people answer a question, we look at a matrix, and then figure out where to put the category. So that's the only way in which AI is being used in this way. So it's not being used on people's personal data, and it's not being used to gather the data. It's just once you get a set of data, when you answer the question theft, robbery, house, police, all those things, we overlay that in that matrix, AI to categorize all of that. So it is not touching anyone's personal data, and that's not used to gather any of the data from the survey. And then as to your first question, there's no surveillance here. We literally place the survey on social media platforms or on digital platforms, and then folks are allowed to they voluntarily ask if you're asked, do you want to take the survey? You click through, you take the survey, no personal identifying data is taken, and then you exit the survey. So I think there's just a little bit of confusion because it involves being on social media and being on digital technology, but there's no surveillance. It's completely voluntary.
And then also just your protocols around data management once someone has taken that survey. So, for instance, what happens to that data once, let's say the terms of your contract is completed. Do you have a destruction process, or essentially, what happens with the data once it is within your possession?
Yes, ma'am. We have a strict protocol. We keep it where the data is kept. So in other words, this is in the United States, not in the UK, not in Canada. So our AWS server is here in the United States. That's where the data lives. And if the contract was to end, we would then destroy the data. There's no sort of ongoing tracking of the data. Obviously, MPD has ownership rights in that data because they've contracted for it, as well as the city of Minneapolis.
And also thinking of that, linking it to reporting, which I know that was a big component that was included in the contract itself. I remember in Pogo there was, when the staff came forward, and lots of debate around it at that time around the requests to have multiple updates and reporting. And I know my office followed up with MPD multiple times to try to get those scheduled. That did not happen. We didn't get response, which is why we end up having to do a legislative directive. So I think getting to Councilmember Cashman's question, this came up in our briefing in terms of how to be able to do more reporting on the public interfacing side, especially since MPD doesn't seem to have a plan in place yet for that public visualization process yet. But I know you mentioned this is something that council members could receive in terms of either those quarterly reports. We're just trying to figure out how to get the public to also be able to see this information.
Right, and so I think I said this to you in Pogo. We're happy to come up here as often as you want and deliver reports whenever you want. It's just up to you and your conversation with the police department. We're happy to respond however you need. So maybe I'll turn it over to the AC. But in other words, we provide reports to council members. We provide reports publicly. We provide reports in any way that the folks that we contract with decide they want to use it. So it's really up to you.
Yeah. Actually, this is something I think would be good since you all are the owners of these reports, in terms of they come directly to you. Is there a way to be able to get these to council members, the public, just thinking ahead of time, especially since there are these precinct breakdowns? That seems to also be helpful.
Yes, Chair, what I will do is bring that request to Chief O'Hara. And a lot of that information you're speaking about, those data, are also within the implementation unit that was brought about when Chief O'Hara came in, and we're anticipating and knew about the MDHR piece and anticipating the federal consent decree. So that's something that I will definitely bring to his attention, and we can get back to you on that.
And then I'll note that as a staff follow-up too, around that piece. And then I did also want to get clarity too of making sure, does this Zen City contract fulfill specifically Article 415 of the MDHR settlement agreement, where it talks about the independent evaluator will conduct an anonymous annual community evaluation survey. So just trying to get clarity on how this actually fits into the MDHR settlement, which I know in Pogo, this is what it was stated as a need for this contract. And you all reiterated that too. So just trying to get a sense of this is the provision that it's aligning with.
And Chair, once again, with that, I'm not an attorney, and I definitely don't work for ALIFA. Mm-hmm. So I would defer that to whether or not it meets those requirements through ALIFA. Our understanding is that at minimum, in part, meets those requirements. But if there's more requested or required, obviously we're more than able to accommodate in every way we can with the resources we have.
And I think you mentioned, is this reporting being shared then with ALIFA or the state monitor too? Yeah.
Yes, we've actually met with the monitor, former Commissioner Harrison, and we provided the information to him. I think there's a question about what additional pieces and how often he'd like it, but yes, beyond that, that's this. We sort of respond to what people ask us to do. We don't want to over assert ourselves, but that's been the process that we've used as we've been meeting with the monitor, and we're happy to continue to meet.
And then I did want to go back to slide 14, just looking at the specific dip. And I believe at that point it was the fairness ratings, and you mentioned that was a national trend. So I'm interested in terms of why that is a national trend typically. And then also for AC Gators, if in your MSTAT meetings, if there were any things that MPD kind of landed with that might have contributed to that decline, specifically for, I'm seeing December of 2024.
In terms of fairness being kind of lower nationally than the other measures, I think it's just kind of, I'm not sure. I'll be pretty straightforward and honest about that. It's just something that we see city by city, and so when we do our comparisons, typically, we included it on one graph to kind of make it really condensed, but typically we are comparing fairness by different demographic groups, different precincts, and looking at it over time. But I did just kind of wanted to flag it because on this graph it does look just very low and an area of concern. It is an area of concern, but it is an area of concern nationally.
And then, yeah, AC Gators, did MPD do a roundtable around potential things that or contributions that possibly landed to this for this month?
And Chair, with December of 2024, I don't have the answer for you. I would be speculating of what that is. We do discuss the trends in crime within our MSTAT meetings as well, but for that particular time, I don't have the answer for you at this point.
Okay. Is that someone in MPD would have an answer?
Yes, if as far as the crime trends and whatnot, I would start with our implementation unit with Commander Yolanda Wilkes. And as far as those data, dashboards and whatnot, we definitely can figure that out with our analysts as well. But as far as a true pinpointing of a reason, be very speculative at times.
Okay. I'll note that as a follow-up too. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I wanted to follow up on that. One of the things that we can do in our survey is add follow-up questions. And we do this for a number of our clients. So when it comes to fairness, we could ask a question like, what could MPD do to improve the way that you feel when it comes to fairness, something like that. And we could get kind of more actionable information over time, or we could kind of pinpoint what has been the issue. And that's a way that we can work on helping MPD improve these kinds of relationships.
And then actually on the open-ended question, I want to make sure I read this right, going for slide 16. If this is what was helping shape the leading kind of topic breakdowns, those open-ended responses, because yeah.
Yeah, the open-ended responses, we collect all of these, and then our AI categorizes them into the topics and subtopics.
Okay, are you all? I mean, I know you mentioned AI. Does the sorting, are you all the ones who feed the categories? Because I was actually kind of interested to know why there wasn't or why there's separation between theft, burglary, and break-ins and crime. I mean, I see them kind of all under the same. Yeah, so was interested in, yes, how that particular sorting happened. If that was through Zen City in terms of categories like you did fairness and all that, or this was just AI doing its jam?
A little bit of both. So the AI does its jam, but we also had some human annotators kind of checking its work along the way as the model was being trained. The crime category, a lot of people just write the word crime. Or they, just something very unspecified. And so that's why we kind of have it as its own topic with a couple different subtopics. Theft, burglary, and break-ins tends to be a little bit more detailed about how people are feeling, whether it's car thefts or, people stealing packages or what have you.
And then for the open-ended question, so is this where I'm assuming also included in the regular reports, at least in our briefings? You got a chance to show us a little bit of that. Just wanted to get a sense of that is broken down by precinct as well and included in the dating report, because I think that's also another area in which council members and the public would like to see in terms of some of those responses that you're getting in a particular area to kind of get a sense of what are top of mind issues, especially if someone took the time to actually fill that part out.
Absolutely. So on the report, the bottom graphs, the vertical bar charts, are what we display that kind of just summarizes the data. We have hundreds of open-ended responses every month. That's why we kind of try to keep the data on the report as brief as possible, as concise and as possible as a summary. On our dashboard, you can look through all of the responses. You can filter by tag. You can filter by precinct, and see how people are responding about that particular issue.
Okay, and then going back to that, recall at the beginning of the presentation, there was mentioning that something would be released this spring? Did I make that up? No? The dashboard? No?
I don't think so.
Okay. Nope. Okay, great. Just want to make sure well, that's noted as a follow-up in terms of reporting. Those are actually all the questions that I had. I do see Councilmember Vital in queue next.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Thank you all so much for this presentation. I appreciate the briefing also. I do have one question that I got from a constituent who is kind of concerned about the data and like how it could be used, and just wondering if you foresee and how you plan to manage any sort of abuse of the data being collected or like breaches of any data collected.
So at this point, we don't foresee any sort of breaches happening. We've spent a lot of time making sure that we build very strong protocols with AWS about holding that data. I think the constant anonymization and the insurance that there's no personally identifiable information kind of allows a little bit less interest from other folks in that data, because it's just basically a large set of data about Minneapolis that is anonymized. So it's a little bit, I think, less interesting to folks who might hack. Nonetheless, we're constantly adjusting our protocols and constantly sort of updating what our licensures are to bring up, SOC 2, the next steps to actually continue to be at the forefront. And then that's also why we segment our data. We keep the data in the place in which it's gathered. So we partner with governments in London, but we keep that where it was gathered. Same thing in Canada, same thing in the United States. So to that extent, that's the kind of best practices that we engage with. We also have a best practices work group at Zen City where we're constantly focusing on how we can make sure that we're staying ahead of best practices.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation, because when I look at the 4th Precinct and just a little bit of information you provided today, it aligns with what I hear as a council member and also what I've learned from our 4th Precinct officers and inspectors, and it really has helped us with the work we need to do as a precinct. And my focus really is about what Northside residents want, and this slide here, you can see the difference precinct by precinct, what is important to folks. And as you see on here, crime, which is probably violence, is the top for the 4th Precinct, and that's what I hear as a council member, but you don't see some of the things like homelessness or some of the other things captured on this particular chart. And I would also say this information has been good in guiding us for like what we need to focus our public safety efforts on. So there are some civilian positions, specifically crime prevention specialists who work on problem properties, which is a big part of the work that we do in Ward 4. It's directly related to what you see here around theft, burglary, break-ins, those kind of property crimes. And so those crime prevention specialists help with problem properties, and they're civilians. They can do a lot of the day-to-day work that officers may be on other calls, some of those more dangerous calls with. We can have crime prevention specialists work on some things, and then we have social workers and others who are embedded in the precinct, and this data has really opened my eyes to how we can use this data to get more of those positions. It's helping me to understand as a council member the work that I can do, and as you know, I was skeptical of this when it came to committee. I wondered what were we doing? Were we repeating something we knew already? I took the survey myself. It just came across my phone on Facebook one day, and I was like, oh, there it is. And of course, so I filled the survey out. It was quick. It was easy. What you described is exactly what happened and then I tried to do it again, and it wouldn't let me do it again. It said, you've done it, so like move on. but that is this is really good information. I'm excited to know what action we can take in the future based off of this data, because that's what we need right now. We need some action to take. We need some steps to take, and it feels good that it's coming directly from the people of Minneapolis, the people who want our services to work, the people who want good policing and good public safety. You're at what, 12,000? I really didn't think that the number would get that big, so that's pretty impressive, and I'm sure there's more to go. So thank you all so much for the continued partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in queue. We do have a few staff follow-up questions that will be sent your way, though. And with that, I will ask the clerks to receive and file that presentation and report. And that said, we have concluded all business that have come before us today. All right, y'all. We are adjourned.